Welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman, and this show is brought to you by Audible.com. That's right, go to audibletrial.com/Opperman Report, and you go there, you sign up for free, you get a free audio book, and it helps support the show. Tonight we're live on CJMarsRadio.com, 365 Live, HazyRadio.com, and then throughout the week you can find us on Para X Radio on Saturday nights, 7 p.m., we're rebroadcast on Awake Radio, Shake and Wake, Firehorse Radio, WTRU Radio, and on Sunday mornings, Penny Entertainment on Blog Talk Radio. And don't forget, you can find us on the Opperman Report on iHeartRadio and also on Spreaker.com. Now, tonight in our first hour, we got with us Mike Marinacci, the author of Mysterious California, as well as the co-author of Weird California and Weird Hauntings. He also wrote the foreword to the book Shadow Over Santa Susana. And that's the book, we had Adam Gorightly on here. So that's the book that Adam Gorightly wrote. Really favorite guest of our listeners here. Mike has a new blog. It's called California Cult at Blogspot. We have a big show coming up for you tonight. First, Mike Marinacci, and then Celestino Mota from Mexico. You can find all these shows on the Opperman Report YouTube channel. You can find them on our Spreaker.com channel and on iHeartRadio. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, what are we waiting for? We're wasting time. Okay, we got Mike Marinacci. Mike, are you there?
I'm here.
Thank you for coming on, brother. So tell us about yourself, and then we can get into your books and this new blog you're doing.
Well, I'm basically a California native. For my entire life, I've been fascinated by the history and the culture of the state, and particularly the more outre and unusual things. When I was a teenager, I found a book called Haunted Britain, which was a beautifully illustrated guide to the ghosts and haunted places and monsters and legends and whatever of the United Kingdom. And I remember wondering, why didn't anybody do anything like this for the U.S.? Because we've got as much here. And in the late 80s, I actually put that idea to the test, concentrating just on this state and the haunted houses and places where Bigfoot has been seen and UFO landing sites and cults and lakes with monsters in them and all that sort of paranormal and unusual stuff, and produced a book called Mysterious California, and was sort of an underground hit at this time, and I think inspired a lot of similar works by people across the U.S. doing research into the legends and sort of strange stories of their own regions and publishing them as toured guidebooks, which I had done originally. More recently, much of the material was taken and updated and revised and combined with a lot of new material in a book that I did with two other authors, Greg Bishop and Joe Osterley, called Weird California. If you've been to a Barnes & Noble, perhaps you've seen it there because it was issued as part of the Weird USA series under the Sterling Publications imprint, which is Barnes & Noble's inside publishing house. Most recently, I've been concentrating more on the research and writing about the unusual religions and spiritual groups and cults and sects in California. I have a blog that I've started where I'm getting the work that I've done out into the public eye, and it may possibly be compiled into one or more books. The blog is at California Cult, that's singular, .blogspot.com. If anybody wants to check out what I've been investigating now and the sort of historical digging and research that I've been into. So that's my background, and that's what I've done and what my interests are. And I'm very glad to be here on Halloween. I wish you and your listeners a very happy Halloween or Samhain or All Hallows Eve. And I'm ready to answer some questions.
Yeah, okay. Well, more recently, because I became familiar with you when I saw that you wrote the foreword to Adam Gorightly's book. So immediately I took an interest. But more recently, you and I have been hanging out in a group on Facebook that's run by Maury Terry about his book, The Ultimate Evil, right? And I guess that's kind of what sparked you. You got you back interested in cults again?
Yes, very much so, and particularly in California-based cults, of which there is certainly some very notorious ones throughout our recent history, whether it's Manson or Jim Jones and People's Temple or the Heaven's Gate group that did the mass suicide near San Diego a few years ago. So along with the more harmless and eccentric ones, I have been digging up a bit about some of your darker and more violent ones as well. And Manson to me has been a fascination since I was a little kid, and I remember when the murders happened. And I've just been reading and doing a lot of research on that over the years. I was actually very honored to write the foreword to Adam's book, because I consider it the most comprehensive of all the works I've seen out on the case, and there have been millions and millions of words written about that case.
Yeah, I haven't even had him back yet on Manson. When I had Adam on, we discussed that Thornley guy who knew, Lee Harvey Oswald. We went into, we spent the whole
night. Is a wild case.
How did that happen?
Yeah, that's fascinated me for a long time. And I first encountered Terry Thornley and his whole thing through Robert Vance on Wilson, and through his connections. Now, of course, they had a big falling out eventually, but certainly I consider Thornley among his other things. He really pioneered the whole concept of the joke or humorous cult or sect, which is what Discordianism really is. I mean, everything that came after him, like the Church of the Subgenius, the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster, whatever, really kind of owes it to his whole playful attitude about, well, let's have a fun sect here. Let's have a goddess of play and paradox. And real interesting guy too. I really wish he would have lived a happier life or a more stable life, but then perhaps he would not have produced what he did and been able to do what he did. But yeah, that's another area of fascination to me, the Discordianism and the whole scene around Thornley and the weird things to which he dipped his toes into over the years.
Hey, speaking of like those fun kind of new cults that they kind of made up, did you ever hear of the Church of the Realized Fantasy that was run by Mickey Caesar back in New York City, Yippie headquarters?
Oh yeah, was that either cannabis or LSD based?
Yeah, Mickey ran Dial Joint.
Oh, him, yes, I've heard of them. Yeah, he was the Pope of Pot.
Yeah, the Pope of Pot, yeah, Mickey Caesar, interesting guy, yeah. And then he had that little Church of the Realized Fantasy.
Yeah. One of my favorite groups, and I actually am writing about them. It's going to be on the blog fairly soon, and I actually know the founder, the two founders of it, although it's been dormant for many years, was a group in Berkeley and San Francisco called the Psychedelic Venus Church, who combined using cannabis as a sacrament and having ritualistic sacred sex practices. So it was like the perfect hippie religion, sex and drugs as holy sacraments. And they were not 100% serious themselves. They had a very kind of tongue-in-cheek attitude about what they were doing. But the Church of the Realized Fantasy is part of that whole very controversial subculture of what are called entheogenic cults or spiritual groups, where the use of cannabis or LSD or peyote or ecstasy or things like that are used in a sacred context for consciousness expansion and contact with God, whatever you conceive that to be. So
it's interesting because I knew Mickey. I knew Mickey very well. I knew all the uses and stuff, Dial Joint. And the whole church was pretty much a big joke, There was never any meetings. Yeah. I wrote about it in that group. But, later on, after I moved away from New York, I guess it was, there was a guy, I think his name was Radlich or something like that, Ragnich, And he was part of that group. He was part of Mickey's guys selling pot because he used to deliver marijuana on bicycles, you know. And he killed his girlfriend and cooked her up into a stew and fed it to the homeless people at not Washington Square Park, but the other park. Are you familiar with that story?
I shouldn't laugh. It's just so bizarre. I am familiar with that story. I've heard that story.
Yeah.
I seem to recall that he wasn't involved so much in cannabis as he was in some of the alphabet soup synthetic entheogens or empathogens. I don't quote me on that. Of course, here I am on being broadcasting it, but I believe that was more what he was doing. But I have heard of that case, and I couldn't name more details, but yeah.
That's a great story we got to look into, man, for sure. Well, now, what do you have that's new and interesting about the Heaven's Gate cult?
Well, not too much, although I had kind of an interesting experience. A couple of weeks ago, I was at a meeting up in Novato in northern Marin County that was held by a man named Dr. Bruce Dahmer, who is an astrophysicist and a brilliant creative guy. And I call him sort of like the ringleader of the Santa Cruz psychedelic hippie scientists. There is this little subculture of people around UCSC who are brilliant physicists and chemists and whatever, who also are either 60s survivors or sort of neo ones like Bruce, who are just involved in both very serious science and consciousness expansion at the same time, and they're very, very tied in with the Burning Man subculture. Anyway, he was speaking, and one of the attendees was Dr. Jacques Vallée, who was very well-known French ufologist and hard scientist himself, and he was the model for Lacombe in the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I actually got to talk to him after the talk, and I mentioned something about him, that he had put out a book in the mid-70s called Messengers of Deception, which was his take on what was really behind the UFO phenomenon. He really looked at how so much of it was being used as a sort of stalking horse for religious and political reasons. One chapter in there is about what was at the time called the Bow and Keep Group, which was this middle-aged man and his wife or girlfriend and a few of their followers sort of going around the Pacific Northwest and talking about the Space Brothers and trying to get people to join them. Well, Vallée encountered these people, interviewed them, and wrote about them and said, watch out, these two are, particularly the guy, are really dangerous. This is a bad, bad group. Well, years later, the same people reemerged as Heaven's Gate in Southern California as, computer programmers, and this was and then of course had a mass suicide. And here was Dr. Vallée 20 years earlier pointing them out and saying, "Watch out, these people are trouble." And I complimented on him on his perception. He said, "Yes, it was." He still remembers just really being creeped out by them, and was glad that he was able to get a warning in the print, even though. Obviously, it wasn't he hit.
That's fascinating. I had never heard that before. Now, but did you know the guy they were building websites, and one of the guys they were building websites for was the guy, he has a Greek name, and he started 1-800-US search, which today is Intellius, He's that guy.
I did not know that. Yeah.
Real quick, let me tell you the story, okay? He drove over there and he found the dead bodies, right? Because they were working on his websites. Then he gets arrested for driving a stolen. He had a warrant on him. When he reported to the cops, he had a warrant on him for driving a stolen car because he had rented a car and didn't return it, something like that. Then, not even a year later, he's taken the company public for $300 million. Okay, take a look at that one, man.
Yeah, some odd stuff behind these groups. Some very, very strange occurrences. And of course, there was that story that one of the victims of the cult. One of the people that committed suicide was the brother of the woman that played Lieutenant Uhura on the original Star Trek.
Really?
So, yeah, her brother was involved in that and was one of the people that committed suicide.
Wow. I got a question from the chat room. Do you have any information on the Mount Shasta Great White Brotherhood cult?
Well, Mount Shasta is kind of been a long source of fascination for me. Really, that stuff got going with Guy Ballard in what's called the I Am work, or the I Am spiritual path. Ballard lifted a lot of his beliefs and doctrines from theosophy and sort of put his own spin on it. And he claimed to have had an encounter with a being, a higher being that called itself Saint Germain on Mount Shasta in the 1920s or 1930s, and got a whole group going around his revelations and writings. And they're still around. They were very big in the 1930s and 1940s. In fact, there was I'm walking over to my bookcase now to find the work. There was a sort of warning book written about them at the time called Psychic Dictatorship in America by Gerald Bryan, saying, well, they were a nascent totalitarian cult, and they were looking for political power. They kind of faded away after World War II, although they're still around, and they were sort of the ones that got the whole Mount Shasta as the great center of, as the holy mountain of America going. Although, of course, beforehand the Indians had legends about the place. There was a book called there was a book called The Dweller on Two Planets, written by some guy who lived in there in the 19th century, that was channeled through this entity called Philus the Tibetan. So there was a little bit of precedence to it being kind of a hot area for oddness, but Ballard and I Am were the ones that really kicked it into high gear.
Have you ever looked into that stuff that Peter Levenda talks about? Like a couple of things. One is how he talks about that group that was like 13 people from the Mayflower and stuff like that, and they were sitting around doing seances and contacting spirits. Are you familiar with that story?
Now, what story was this again?
Peter Levenda tells a story about that there were these 13 occultists, I think it was like in the North New England area, and they would have seances and contact ETs and spirits and stuff. Have you looked into that?
I haven't heard that one. I know that there's a New England connection with one group that I've written about called the Esoteric Fraternity, which came out of that area, and we're doing work like that, and we're involved with the very beginning of a Theosophical Society. But Butler was also the first person to really popularize astrology, to really kind of work down the charts to make it more understandable to lay people. And Alan Leo, who's a very famous astrologist, sort of lifted a lot of his work from Butler. But Butler settled, and a few followers settled in this place called Applegate, which is a little town up in the foothills of the Sierras, and formed this celibate order called the Esoteric Fraternity, where they lived together communally and published these books of esoteric work and basically raised animals and had a big vegetable garden and whatnot. We're very quiet and low key. And oddly enough, Vallée also wrote about them in Messengers of Deception as kind of an archetypal authoritarian, although very basically harmless cult. That were, had these great ambitions of basically taking over the world on behalf of their divine vision, but just never got more than about 20 people, and eventually died out because since they were celibate, they didn't reproduce, and they didn't really publicize themselves much. So, but they definitely had that, New England connection. We're doing that sort of thing in the 19th century. So that may have been what Levenda was referring to. Was them.
Yeah, what about, right, that probably is. Now, what about when Levenda talks about that Catholic Orthodox Church group that was incorporated by the same lawyer that incorporated the Protestant church down in New Orleans. And it was all the guys. Yes. Yeah, right. Tell us about that. The Catholic group, because I want to hear more about that.
Okay, well, that's, again, it's just another thing that's fascinated me for a long, long time, which is what I call the autocephalous or independent non-Roman Catholic churches, or the sort of the sort of independent Catholic and Orthodox churches. I had heard that story that that the same person had incorporated both those groups, and there's been a lot of crossover between the people involved in that world, who are called wandering bishops, because they have the official apostolic succession from the original apostles as bishops. It's just they're not tied into the regular Roman Catholic or Orthodox or Anglican churches. They have all sorts of weird connections to all sorts of things. I know several people involved in the movement, several of these bishops. The ones I know are all right. You know, a lot of the people involved in that whole world are basically just religious eccentrics who like having the status as an episcopate, and like wearing the mitre and the robes and doing the whole liturgical thing. But there's some pretty sketchy characters involved too. And of course, whenever I think about New Orleans, the connection with New Orleans in that world, and the connections with New Orleans and occultism, I think of David Ferry, who, as you might know, is a huge character in the JFK assassination conspiracies, who himself, along with Jack Martin, who we worked with, were both old Catholic bishops.
And Guy Bannister too.
Guy. I don't know if Guy Bannister was, because he was very, very anti-Catholic. I don't think he really liked anything about the culture. So a couple other people that I think he may be confusing him with a couple of the other people around him that were in the New Orleans scene that were also involved in that. Bannister, I do not think was part of that. Bannister had his own weird associations and connections, but it always really, I remember first getting interested in the whole subject many years ago when Robert Anton Wilson was speaking and mentioned this fact. The subject of the JFK assassination came up, and he mentioned this fact that Ferry was one of these people. And I said, I didn't know there were such things. I got to check this out more. And I started researching it, saying, my God, there is this fascinating little ecclesiastic religious underworld of these, of like hundreds and hundreds of these people, and scores of these little churches. And of course, the more you investigate, the more you begin to see, the strange connections that some of them have, and the crossovers that many of them have into hard occultism or Eastern spirituality or God knows what. Fascinating world and subculture to me. I mean, I took my undergraduate degree in sociology, so it's like any kind of subculture or counterculture just automatically has interest for me.
Okay, well, then that sort of kind of brings up the question about Mel Gibson, who has his own Catholic church on his compound, and his father. What do you know about that? Yeah.
Oh, a bit. I know that there's a couple very odd things about that too. He actually just doesn't have it himself. He financed the construction of a large chapel up in the Malibu Hills. He is involved with not so much old Catholicism, what's called Sedevacantism, or basically super traditional Catholics that think every pope after at least John 23rd, if not Pius XII, is an anti-pope, and they all have gone against the historical teachings of the church, and they're all modernists and whatever. And so they try to preserve the old Latin Mass and all of the the older usages and doctrines of the Roman Catholic Church. He's part of that movement. He got it from his dad, who is quite fanatical, but he's a bit more modern about the whole thing, but still finest churches out there. Well, when the news about this church came out, reporters started digging and found out that the land that it was built on was purchased from a a man who called himself, let's see if I can find his name here. This is Sarah Darian, and he ran a group called the Aquarian Educational Group, which was a new age and very, very heterodox spiritual group that was around in the 60s and 70s in L.A. and Southern California. And Mr. Darian was himself had been made. He started life as an Orthodox priest and had gone more into the New Age occult area. But again, he himself got made an independent bishop by somebody. Again, if you have this connection of very, very traditional liturgy and doctrines and whatever with some pretty odd and outre spirituality, and really, the more you really go down the rabbit hole with a lot of this stuff, the more you dig, the more of these strange connections you find, strange background. But
why do you think that is? Do you think that's because of coincidence, or do you think they're all in on it?
I think a lot of it is also the type of people that are attracted by this sort of stuff. These are non-mainstream people. They're adventurous. A lot of the time, especially the older ones, just don't care, what people think of them. They're very eccentric. And often, as a paradoxically, people that are great individualists or eccentrics often tend to flock in the same scenes. And one thing that I think ties in a lot of this is just these are all people that are very much alienated from mainstream consumer capitalist, mass media driven America. And so they exist on the fringes, and often the fringes aren't, it's more like you're on the outside of a circle, but you're closer, that you sooner or later you start crossing paths with other people that may be very, very different from you in their beliefs and practices and whatever, but have a common interest in that. We're not part of the mainstream world anymore. We're kind of in our own little world here. So yeah, I think it's really, I think a lot of it is just the type of person that is drawn to these sort of demi-moms.
Yeah, I had a guest recently that said that interesting people, find interesting people, and right. That's definitely the truth. Yeah, and what do you call it? Also, too, it's a small world.
Mm-hmm.
It really is. If we were to talk for 20 minutes, we'd know some of the same people. Well, what do you do? We know Adam Guerrero.
Yeah. Yeah. My own favorite example of something I worked out just for myself, in that I'm, you've heard about the whole game, parlor game of 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. You can find anybody who's connected to the actor Kevin Bacon for 6 degrees of association. I found I was, I think, either 4 or 5 away from Adolf Hitler.
Get out of here!
And the reason was, my mom was friends with Jessica Mitford, a British writer, whose sister, Unity Mitford, was Hitler's girlfriend, because she was part of the Mitford family, which were these crazy English aristocrats. And half the girls, they were all girls in the generation. Half of them became communists, and half of them became fascists. And Unity was like the most beautiful and the nuttiest of all of them. And she became a very enthusiastic supporter of Nazi Germany and close to probably his paramour. So, yeah, if you just look at the associations in your life, particularly if you're like me and you have a lot of strange people in your life. Not to say that my mom is strange, but I just use that as an example of somebody with a very interesting connection.
So wait, instinctively
find these connections.
Instinctively, have you ever been tempted to invade a country?
No, not really. Not really my line of interest, but it's. Yeah, it's again. Start looking at the lines of association, and they're much closer than you'd think.
Yeah,
I think somebody once did a sociological experiment about giving a package to somebody who's a complete stranger anywhere in the world, just picked at random, and they did a whole bunch of these things where somebody was given a package that says, just through your personal connections, you have to get this to so-and-so, such and such. Don't send it to them directly. Just have it pass through connections. I think they found out there was an average of 5 degrees of separation from anybody in the world.
Wow. Yeah, and I believe it.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I was just going to mention, I got a friend of mine, Sarah Jane Woodall, and she owns a blog called Wonder Hussy. You two would get along great because she does that same kind of stuff with the California adventures and stuff like that. I'm going to send you a link to her blog, and I was just telling her about you. But now we're going to have
to see it, yes.
You'd like her. She's really cool, and she goes to the same places you go to. We're going to take a little commercial break right now, if my producer's ready.
Okay.
A good little 3 or 4 minutes. And okay, good. And when we come back, what I'd like you to do is be a little tour guide of California. Tell us weird places we should go visit and stuff like that.
Will do.
Thank you, my friend.
We'll do it.
So we'll be right back after these messages. We got with us tonight. We got Mike Marinacci, one of the coolest guys that we've had on so far. A good friend of Adam Goldright.
Thank you.
Nah, come on. You know, he's got all these great books. What do you got? This is all the stuff I'm into, man. Okay? This is all my stuff. Mysterious California. He's a co-author of Weird California and Weird Hauntings. And he wrote the foreword to Shadow Over Santa Susana. And he's got this brand new blog he's got out there. It's called California
Cult.blogspot.com.
There you go, brother. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to the Opperman Report. We're brought to you by audibletrial.com. Go to audibletrial.com, /Opperman Report. Get yourself a free audiobook. We're here tonight with Mike Marinacci, author of these books. I got all the links to these books, by the way, on the Opperman Report blog, so you can go there and pick them up right now tonight. Mysterious California, Weird California, Weird Hauntings, and The Shadow Over Santa Susana, which he wrote the foreword for, which is an Adam Goldright book. So now, Mike, by the way, in the second hour, we are coming up Celestino Mota. He's from Mexico, and he's going to be talking about those students down there, the big student kidnapping and the mass graves and stuff like that going on there in Mexico. These guys are down there in real life, and we're going to have bringing some real important news to you guys. So, Mike, in California, let's say I'm kind of a strange guy, weird guy, right? And I want to go to California. Where would you recommend I visit that's not Disneyland and the usual stuff?
Well, as far as haunted houses, I would say the number one haunted house in California would be the Whaley House in San Diego. It's part of the Old Town State Historic Park Complex down there, so it's open to the public. The site of the house and the house itself have seen all sorts of violent and bad incidents ever since the 1840s. There was an expedition on the site. There was an almost minor war there between Whaley and some government officials. There's a murder. Several people have died there of diseases, diphtheria and whatnot. It's just one of these loci of bad energy, and really many reports over the years of all sorts of manifestations of ghosts, people seeing people in Victorian clothing walking around, cold spots in different places. I was once there on a very hot July day and was walking up a stairway and passed my hand through a invisible grapefruit-sized cold spot, and I was told later by the docents that the stairway is one of the big areas where things happen. Sounds, unaccountable sounds and voices coming when nobody else is in there. The smell of cigar smoke when nobody is smoking for hundreds. Thomas Whaley, who built the house, loved his Cuban stogies. And one of my favorite things is when you go there, they have a whole, I don't know if they still have it, but they had it when I was there, a bulletin board display of all the weird photographs people have taken in the place. And one very striking one I remember was a Polaroid, so it couldn't be faked, of a table and somebody sitting at the table. You can see like their legs, and then you look over on the other side and you can see this sort of half-formed, diaphanous leg and dress of some woman in Victorian costume. And she wasn't there when they took the picture, but there was this figure wearing a Victorian full skirt and shoes, right? Sitting at this table. And balls of light, all sorts of odd things there. And it's funny, when we were talking to the ghosts, and to them, this stuff happens all the time, and it's no big deal for them. They're very, very blasé about all the weird stuff going on there.
Do you have a picture? Do you have a picture that ghost scanned on your blog there, the California cults?
No, I don't have any pictures of anything that happened there, ghosts in general. That's not really the focus, but there's a tremendous amount of information about the Whaley House online, including, in fact, I was actually looking at it last week, and they've got some of these very strange photos that were taken there. You just have to basically just type in Whaley House on Google or whatnot, and, all the information is there. It's an infamous place. And that would be, if I was looking for a ghost, particularly tonight on Halloween, that would be the first place I'd go to California.
Okay, I don't think I'd want to go there. What else do you have? that's not my type of thing.
Okay. Well, we were talking about Mount Shasta earlier. The whole Mount Shasta milieu, whether you accept Ballard or any of the other people who've claimed that they're survivors from the ancient lost continent of Lemuria, which was sort of the Pacific Atlantis living there, or whether they've got the Space Brothers or the Great White Brotherhood of these superior beings that are haunting the place, just the whole otherworldliness of it. I mean, if you've ever seen it on the highway from a distance, it's not like the Sierras. It really stands alone. It's almost like an American Olympus. You can look at it and say, that's not all places for here. And certainly there are so many cults and sects and odd groups that have, surrounded the mountain over the years, that they just kind of lend this very otherworldly flavor to the place. It's beautiful around there, and plus you have these all this activity of people that really believe there is something very special and strange and different about Shasta. So I'd recommend that too.
And what could you do when you get there? You go hiking? You go drive around? What do you do?
Go hiking, visit the town, talk to people in the town. Do a little research on the history of a lot of these things. I believe they still have it. As I am every year around July the 4th, does a whole outdoor pageant based on their metaphysical beliefs and rites. That's I've heard is very interesting. I've never seen it myself, but I've seen pictures of it, and that's something that's one of the real key things that happens there every year. It's one of these places I think you just have to be there and kind of absorb the atmosphere of it. Another place like that where it's just got a very otherworldly atmosphere, I would say, would be Joshua Tree National Park, which has been notorious for many, many years as what's called a UFO window. This is one of these places where people just constantly are seeing UFOs. There used to be a convention out there at this place called Big Rock of UFO enthusiasts and contactees that would have every year. There's a privately owned building near Joshua Tree called the Integratron, which is this bizarre half-dome building that was built supposedly on the instructions of aliens, and they would do things like allow you to travel in time and reverse the aging process and whatnot. I couldn't guarantee any of those, but apparently it's publicly accessible again. I don't know the details, but it's that I've heard it's worth a visit. I have a good picture of it in Mysterious California. And it just, the whole landscape of Joshua Tree is almost like the landscape of Mars or some different planet. You just go over to the rim there and you feel like you're in a different world. And I can see why people have visions out there and see odd things in the sky. And, of course, that's also at Cap Rock out there, which is one of the landmarks, is where they had the cremation ceremony of Graham Parsons, who was the inventor of country rock and a very big figure in the late 50s, early 70s music scene. He partied a bit too hard. He used to go out there all the time with members of the Rolling Stones and whatnot, just hang out and soak up the weird atmosphere. And one night he was at the motel there and partied a little too hard and died, and his road manager hijacked his corpse and brought it out to Cap Rock because he claimed that he made some sort of a death pact that the first one to die would be cremated by the other one at Cap Rock because it was a place of power. And so that's become to have another place associated with myth and weirdness in Joshua Tree National Monument. They even made a movie about the incident. I forget what the title is of it. But, so, yeah, Joshua Tree's another one.
Yeah, I tried to sit through that movie. I know what you're talking about. I tried to watch that movie.
Yeah.
But now, what do you think was going on with that? Do you think maybe something else happened, and that's why he was burning the body out there? Or do you think he really?
I don't know. I don't know. You'd have to ask. What was his name? Well, the guy who did it, Phil Kaufman. And here's another one of these weird connections. Phil Kaufman, who was his friend and manager, was also was also doing time in the federal prison at Terminal Island in the early 60s, and was a very close friend at the time of Charles Manson.
Wow.
And he helped teach him guitar, and he talked to him a lot. In fact, Kaufman went out and visited Manson's compound in Chatsworth, where he got the family afterwards, and was invited to join, and he said thanks, but no thanks, and this was just a little while before the murders. So there's another one of your weird connections again. God knows. I could not tell you what was going on in his mind, or what, if there was more to it besides just a strange sort of death pact that these two guys made.
Yeah. What about this place you got in the picture on your Facebook page, right? You got this big mountain behind you. It's all painted about Jesus and God and love.
Oh, yeah. That's Salvation Mountain. That was actually the project of one man who died fairly recently. He was getting on and had some sort of lung trouble. I don't know the details. Leonard, I forget his last name, but he just spent many years out there creating that whole thing with plaster of Paris and paint, and it's really kind of like the world's biggest piece of folk art. It is basically a largely man-made mountain covered with quotes, in colorful quotes from the Bible, and the appeals for the salvation and to confess your sins and all that. And everybody that knew Leonard said that he was just a very, very humble man and very loving and non-judging, and he just had dedicated his life to getting this message out there. And it's out near the Salton Sea. It's out near a town called Nyland, which is sort of on the southeast corner of the Salton Sea. If you look up Salvation Mountain online, you'll find all the information you need about it. And what's also interesting is right next door to it is this place called Slab City, which is an old, started as, I believe, an old abandoned military base, and then got taken over by dropouts and retirees and square pigs of all kinds who just made their own sort of DIY settlement out there and created a little town. And I believe it's technically public land out there. It's federal land, and there have been some half-hearted attempts to get them out, but really the government, I think, has bigger fish to fry these days, so they've kind of let them be. And that's kind of an interesting little sort of community that rose out of nowhere. It's like Burning Man, except it's smaller and it's permanent, basically, is how I would describe it. So Slab City is worth checking out. It's just kind of an only in California thing. And,
do you get into Burning Man? Do you go down to Burning Man?
Oh yeah, I've been 3 times.
Okay.
I would say if you have any interest at all, go. It's worth going just to have the experience. It's not an easy week. It's very demanding. It is the most inhospitable place I have ever been to on Earth. But the creativity and the very special culture that's created out there by all the attendees is just unlike anything I've ever experienced. I don't think I need to go again. I think I'm just getting a little old to deal with the deprivations of the land and the circumstances. But I'd recommend anybody who would be interested to go while they're still having it, because it's getting bigger all the time. And eventually, I think they may have to just stop it, because it becomes its own city in many ways. But that's, even though it's technically in Nevada, it was something that was created originally by Californians. It started out in San Francisco on Baker Beach as sort of this guy's private ritual, and he invited his friends, and it just got bigger and bigger every year. And then finally said, well, where can we have it? Let's go out to the desert. And if I could mention another funny historical thing or footnote to that, that's not the first time that happened. In the summer of 1965, when the sort of Francisco, when the beatnik culture had just kind of died, people were wondering what was going to happen next. I started having this young group of artists and weirdos and whatever who were beginning to take LSD, which was then illegal, and form bands. And they decided, the beginning of one summer, let's go out to Virginia City, which is this old western town up above Reno in the mountains, and play music out there, take over to one of the old saloons and play music and drop acid and pretend like we're old cowboys and have group sex and do all these proto-hippie things. And it became this kind of famous thing because it was really the beginning of what we called the hippie movement and anticipated the summer of love and all that. It was the first these people sort of got together as a group and said, hey, we're all kind of doing the same stuff. We're all kind of bonding together out here in this, this very, compared to San Francisco, rather conservative and quiet part of the country in Nevada. Let's keep it going. And I always like to say, well, it was almost like Burning Man 25 or 30 years before Burning Man really got going. It was the same idea of these San Francisco freaks and artists and creative people saying, let's go and party out in a weird place in Nevada for a while and sort of be creative and crazy and bond out there and bring the energy back. So I've always been, thought that was kind of a funny parallel or precedent.
We're getting down to about 7 minutes left. So you got time to tell us a couple of your favorite stories, and then we'll plug your books and stuff like that. And then we'll invite you back. We're going to beg you to come back. All right, man?
Okay, yeah, sure. Okay, any particular stories or subjects?
I don't know, man. Well, because we've only got a few minutes. Like, do you have a favorite one you want to tell us, or I can just ask you?
You can ask. I like,
Okay. What about the Rainbow Family? Ever doing that Rainbow Family stuff?
I went to a regional gathering out in the Imperial County desert many years ago. I liked a lot of it. It's a little primitive for me.
Yeah.
It seems like what they're doing, what Burning Man is doing, but they're much less organized about it, and they don't have, of course, at Rainbow, no money. Everything is voluntary. Everything is donated, and it also, I think, tends to attract some people that cause problems there because they are so accepting. I think even though you have at Burning Man the whole concept of radical inclusion, I think the fact that the tickets cost a fair chunk of change, and it needs money and organization to go out into this inhospitable dry lake, hundreds of miles from everything, screens out most troublemakers and yahoos and really, genuinely damaged or dangerous people. I think with Rainbow, even though they have it in very, on national forest land or public land in very obscure places, I think the stories and things I've heard over the years, it tends to attract more of that type. People that, and I know a couple of Rainbows who say they call them Drainbows, people that just go there and expect to be fed and clothed and housed and entertained for free and give nothing in return. And so it's really what they call the tragedy of the commons. You open up something as free and unfortunately there's going to be people taking advantage of it and wrecking the whole thing. And I'm surprised if it lasted as long as it did. It really started in 1971. You have these, the national gatherings every year, and I've never attended a big national gathering, but who knows? It's just one of these things that intrigues me, and I've know a couple people involved and been to a regional one that was kind of enjoyable. yeah.
Okay, now what about, real quick, because we only have a little bit of time, what about now connections, do you have any unusual connections that we don't know about between the Process Church cult and the whole Charlie Manson stuff and the Beach Boys and stuff? And how about, do you know anything about when John Lennon went out to California with May Pang? Do you know about any, if he brushed up against any Process guys?
I don't know about that. I really defer on my knowledge of the Process to Adam Parfrey of Feral House Press, who wrote a great book about them and did a lot of really, really hardcore research into that organization. What I've heard is there's depends on who you talk to as far as the connections to Manson, as to how extensive they were and how and whether he really had anything besides, beyond a casual connection or not. I can tell you, again, weird, odd connections that a very close friend of mine was associated with Brian Wilson for a while. And back before he got therapy, back when Brian was really had kind of hit bottom in the mid and late 70s, and he has some interesting stories about what that was like. But yeah, of course, there's the Dennis Wilson and Manson, which is Manson really was really pestering a lot of people in the entertainment business. He was really trying to make it as a singer-songwriter, and his whole connection with Dennis Wilson was mainly because Dennis picked up on a couple of his girls and then brought him, and then they brought Charlie over to the house, and they sort of stayed for over a month with the whole family. But as far as the Process, they're an interesting group, and I hear, I know that's a common subject on the Maury Terry group. I really need to do more research and look into them a bit more. But I always hear that really their center was not so in California. It's really not so much Los Angeles as it was San Francisco. And even there, I think they just kind of there was so much activity in the late '60s there with so many groups that they kind of got lost in the shuffle. That really their stronghold from places like London and New York and even New Orleans. So take that as you will.
Yeah, there's so much in San Francisco anyway. Besides that, the Zodiac, and then the whole Colonel Aquino and the Temple of Set and all that stuff as well.
Oh yes, yeah.
What's going on over there?
Yeah, it's. I always say about San Francisco, it was a city founded by crazy dreamers. It was it was a nutty place ever since Mr. Brannon went running down the muddy main street with a bottle of ore in his hand, yelling, "Gold, gold on the American River!" Ever since then, it has just attracted people with wild dreams, whether that's just being wealthy or being world-renowned artists or starting religions or being rock stars or whatever. So it's got a funny energy about it, and a funny culture, and it attracts a certain type of person. And it goes way back to, you can read a book like Herbert Asbury's The Barbary Coast. Herbert Asbury was the guy that wrote The Gangs of New York about the similar thing in New York City in the 19th century. And even back in the 19th century, it was just violent, crazy, corrupt. In the Barbary Coast, they had all this nutty stuff going on, live sex shows and prostitution and whatever. And you don't hear about these things normally. It was also a combination of a port city and a boomtown. So really very volatile people have come to it over the years. So you've had a lot of violence and a lot of just very weird goings on.
Well, you know what?
World too.
On that note, prostitutes and gold and all that stuff, we got to say goodnight, my friend. Okay, but thank you, Mike-Marinacci, man, for coming on. The author of Mysterious California, Weird Hauntings. He wrote the foreword to The Shadow Over Santa Susana. You got a link to all these books on the blog, the Opperman Report. He's got a new blog called California Cults. Cults or cults? Is there an S at the end of it?
Cult singular.
California Cult.blogspot.com. And I got there's a link to that too up on the Opperman Report blog. Michael, thank you very much. We'll have you back again, okay, my friend?
Thank you, Ed. It's been a pleasure.
Good night.
Okay, good night.
Good night.